Thank you, Brother Todd. Good morning. Whoa, I'm glad you're in the house. Good to see you. Good to see you, my brother. We rejoice. Oh, my. Always good to look out and see the saints of God, and certainly those that are working through different ailments. And Travis, as well as others of you, know for sure God's got your back. He says, I got this. He says, one thing I know how to do is I know how to do God. I'm pretty good at it. Yes. So he knows how to bring us through it. And Brother Charlie, we are so thankful, grateful that he's come to the end of his treatment. And we're rejoicing with you because we do life together. And we're so thankful. You fought a good fight. And God has proven himself to be the God who can bring us to it and through it. And we look back and thank him for it. So we're thankful for that. Well, somebody said it right. It's kind of a good catch of a phrase that how do you get to heaven? How do you get to heaven? How do you get to heaven? And they said it. Just turn right and keep straight. That's a good way to understand it. Just turn right and keep straight. That's a good way to put it. I want to put it into the airways that there's nothing more vital, important, necessary, essential, you know the point, to get you to God's place is learning how to get the will of God right and the worship of God right. That's kind of top tier stuff. It's not low level. You're going to make it. You're going to be in glory. You're going to be where all the saints of God go forever. No night there, no darkness there, no pain, suffering there, no devil there. If you are ready and willing, and you are, to get God's will right, the will of God, and the worship of God. I put that into the airways because maybe Leviticus seems rather obscure. Not one of those, well, let's call it familiar, even favorite books of your biblical reading. Maybe you've never really spent a lot of time in Leviticus. It seems so, well, a bit, yeah. He said it. But do you know that this book, as we're going to bring out, actually, factually, is going to teach us a guaranteed way to get the will of God right and the worship of God right. At least you owe it to your own growth and understanding going forward to have a better appreciation for the book of Leviticus. Now, we said it, that whenever you open, and we're going to do it with all the 66 books, whenever you open the books of the Bible, maybe you're going to do a classroom study on it, maybe you're going to do a personal study on it, preacher's going to do a sermon on it, that you got to look at the information, you got to look at the instruction, and you got to look at the insight. I break it down in that trifecta. Information is not intended to be life application. It's supposed to be apprehension of what are the basic who, what, when, why of the book. That's my head knowledge of every book of the Bible. It has an author. It has a reason for it appearing in the sacred canon of God. Sometimes even the timing of the book has to be understood in its own historical timeline, or that will lead to some very bad applications in the instruction and the insight. So we have looked at the information. Now let's look at the instruction and the insights of the book. Instruction goes to the doctrinal truths. We're going to get into that this morning. The dogma, the instruction, the bottom line teaching that I ought to know and obey. Not just know information, but obey. Application. And then, I don't think this is something we should overlook. It's impossible for me to go into any book of the Bible, Genesis, Leviticus, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicle, all the books of the Bible. It's impossible for me not to have a learning curve when it comes to something that I'm struggling with, that I'm going to come across in that book. In that book, it's going to be something that is going to raise my attention to, Van, you got to work on this. You got to get this more in alignment with your divine possibilities and even the struggles that you're having. So this brings us to the insights, spiritual principles that speak to the issues that I'm dealing with in my own personal life. We're going to look at that this morning. Leviticus. Who wrote it? Moses. When was it written? 1400 BC. About 2,500 plus years removed from the beginning of Genesis 1:1, roughly. Who was it written to? Well, the original title was Matters About the Levites. That's the original Hebrew title. So we spoke accurately that it was written to the Levites, but primarily to Aaron and his immediate lineage. Two of them are going to fall tragically in Leviticus. Nahab and Abihu. There are going to be replacement. God always has a replacement for those who don't get it right. But we believe we'll get it right. But then why? Well, it's a worship rule book. One way of seeing the book. Now, let's get into the instructions. First of all, number one, I want you to get this, about 7, 8 things I want to bring out here, is that God establishes his presence and his power and his promises at the place of the tabernacle. Don't overlook that. The tabernacle represents the worship of God. The place where God says, I ought to be worshiped. Oh, that's a different construct and concept today. It's not a given place, though there is a place that we ordain, 3211 North Main Street, and that ought not to be forgotten or dismissed or disregarded. Even this place of the assembly of the atmosphere ought to be an ordained place. We ought not make it secular, common. God's worship is done here. Don't make it trivial. Don't make it so common that it loses its aura of celebration and exaltation, because God's spiritual business is done here. But He says that this is out of the Exodus narrative. This is how Exodus closes. For the cloud, this is repetition, the cloud of the Lord, that's called in academic terms a theophany, a divine manifestation in the natural, a theophany, a seeing, a theophany in the cloud by day, and a fire was over it by night. Watch this now. In the sight, visible sight of all Israel throughout their journeys. God says, I want you to pay attention, God says. Optically, mentally, spiritually, personally, holistically, that I want you to focus your attention on the power, presence, and promises of God connected to the gathering place. That's where I'm going to demonstrate that I'm with you. The amazing thing about this is that when Exodus comes to its drawing last week's month's conclusion, they are in mobility. They are moving. Do you know that throughout the Leviticus narrative, there is no movement? Everything takes place in one spot, right there, where the tabernacle was at that mountain. Everything stops. Very important for me to grasp that. Numbers, is going to be more movement. It's going to be more motion. But you know what God says? Before we go any further, we're going to the promised land. Let's get an understanding that you won't make it to the promised land if you don't get the will right and the worship right. And you know what, brother? That fell on deaf ears to a whole generation. That's a fact. Save Joshua and Caleb. What was to be learned at that mountain was forgotten as they move forward. Tragically, but that's the undisputable, undeniable biblical narrative. God says, I swore in my wrath that they will not enter in. I made a decision about them. They're not going into Canaan. They're going to wander for 40 years. That generation died off. Their children took the reins. I don't think they forgot two things: what they learned about the will of God and the worship of God at that mountain. That was two W's. And they didn't forget the cost of these wanderings, going nowhere in the wilderness. The thing is, watch the progression. Watch the progression. I don't know about the need for oratorical skill and style. There's nothing wrong with that, but I do know the need for good sound teaching. So let's just get some teaching in. In Genesis, I said it, let's say it again, the second recorded sin was Cain's unacceptable worship. God could have said that something bad happened to Cain, and we don't know anything more about it. But he says, no, I want to be very specific. I want to be very, very indisputable, undeniably specific. He didn't get worship right. He thought that he could optically, the way he saw things, internally, mentally, the way he sized up things, that he could worship, the way he wanted to worship, not the way God expected him to worship. That was a fatal error. And what is so amazing is that he couldn't spin out of the misbehavior with Cain because he was not in a good headspace about his adoration and exaltation, his worship of God. When you don't get God right, you can't get folks right. That's a basic fact. Your worship does affect your singleness, does impact your marriage, does impact your manhood, your femininity. It does impact every part about you, because there are things that you learn about, here it is, the presence of God and the power of God and the provisions of God and the promises of God in a worshipful experience that has application to the rest of your life across the whole of it. It's all always about worship. So in Exodus, God's people are set free and redeemed to worship. I cannot forget what God says to Moses. I'll give you a sign. Because after we go through with Nero, with Pharaoh, you're going to serve me, worship me right at this very place. We're coming right back to this spot. Isn't that wonderful about her? God, I can call the spot. It's going to take place right here at this spot. You're going to do your spiritual business. That's Exodus. Polytheism is all many of them have ever known. Poly, many gods, false gods, wrong gods, no gods, idols. Egypt had a plethora of gods, and that's all many of them have been exposed to. That's why it was not a hard thing for them to build an idol, a calf, because that was their default position. God had to get the bad stuff out so that he can get the right stuff in. He challenges them in Exodus 20 that you ought to have no gods before me. Let's get your head space right about worship. Then we come to Leviticus, and he says, I want to be much more detailed. I want to be much more on the mark about commands about how to get worship right and keep it right. There is a progression. There is a progression in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Now, on the instructions, we also need to point out here that at the start of Leviticus, God speaks. Let's get this. The very start. Exodus is centered around the tabernacle. Leviticus 1, he's still at the tabernacle. At the start of Leviticus, God speaks to Moses from the place of worship. From the place of worship. From the place of worship, about a way of worship, three things that's authorized, that's acceptable and approved. He says, I want to speak to you, Moses, about worship from the place of worship. And I want you to begin to talk to the people about how vital worship is. Leviticus chapter 1, verse 2. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tabernacle of meetings. That's the place of worship. Speak to the children of Israel when you bring an offering, when you worship. Here's how you do it. And that's the narrative that sticks for the whole of the book. They got to be listening now. They've got to be taking notes, because there are life-changing things that are going to be put before them that they've got to carry out. Remember, worship is regulated. It's not optional. It's not something that God says, like Burger King, have it your way. No, that's not worship. That's a good burger, but that's bad worship. That you've got to do it my way if you're going to come into the King's highway. Now here it is. Leviticus stands separate and apart, almost in a category by itself in the 5 books of the Pentateuch. For here it is, the specificity of details that God gives about how Israel. There is no other book that speaks more detailedly about worship. In the New Testament, we speak about Ephesians 5:16, Colossians 3:16, Revelations. There are some chapters there, 1 Corinthians 11 and 12 and 13 and 14. My sister, you all, that's a worship thing. But nothing compares to the detail of Leviticus. It doesn't even come close. It makes me wonder, why so much detail? Why be so meticulous? Why be so pedantic? Why be so specific? Because God says, I'm teaching you about roles, regulations, rites, and rituals that you dare not forget. It's all about obedience. We're going to close with that. Everything that Leviticus, this book, third book of the Bible, third book of the Pentateuch, sets forth about worship is grounded in this essential outcome. Here it is. Get this, Deborah. This is what you want when your worship experience is over on a Sunday morning or in a personal moment. You want it to be a sweet aroma to the Lord. Not checking off a box. But you want to get up, you want to come forth knowing that God said, man, I like you. I like you. I like that. You know, the Bible said that Enoch walked with God, and he stayed so close to God. He stayed so connected to God. He stayed so near to God that God said, look, I'm just going to take you now. And he could not be found because Enoch walked with God. There's something about a man or woman who's determined to get their will of God right and their worship right. A sweet aroma to the Lord. Now, everything that Leviticus requires, there's a lot, and demands about worship can be traced to this command. Here's the key. Here's the key. Last but not least comes at the latter part of the book. And keep my commandments, or keep my Sabbath. Don't get so immersed in the secular and the social that you forget the sabbatical. Don't get so caught up in the earthly that you have you lose your stuff for the spiritual. You've got to come to a point, Walter, where Sunday mornings is not a chore, but a celebration. When I was younger, and that's been a few weeks, I can remember that folks got ready for Sunday on Saturday. I can remember that. I just remember. I mean, really, I remember that. I remember straightening combs and greasing, back in the day, and crying out and getting everything ready and greens being cut and everything get all ready because folks were getting ready. I remember clothes being ironed. I always do it different now. But there was an expectation, there was an anticipation, and there was a longing for celebration. Man, I need a break from the weekday to come into the Lord's Day. Don't you need a break? Yes. So, I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols, for I am the Lord your God. Notice that he doubles down on it. Leviticus affirms this basic truth. Don't ever forget it. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. We must be taught how to worship right. What I have learned, my brother Todd, what I have learned is that God says, the one thing, man, I don't need in worship is creativity. I need obedience. I don't need the imagination of I just need the exaltation of your heart to me. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not asking for you to come up with some new script. Now, I've got to be careful here, but, man, if you look at certain podcasts and certain YouTube, it's amazing what passes for worship today. It's some crazy stuff going on. Crazy stuff. It's off the, what is it, young people? Whatever that is, it's off it. And they call it worship. They call it whatever. And yet Jesus spoke about it. My brother talked so profoundly about it in spirit and truth. So it gets very, very detailed because you can't do right until you are taught right. He teaches us. So let's get specific about here. It teaches us about 5 offerings. 5 offerings that are set forth in Leviticus. It gives God's commands in the expression of 5 offerings. Burnt offerings. Now this is associated with a spirit of worshipful submission and surrender to God. That's that word. The olah. The olah, that's the word. The olah, that's the word. The burnt offering. It also indicates a dedication to God. Now, just for the record, and others, but Leviticus 3:1-3-9 and 1:10-13, 1:14 through 7, he addresses this burnt offering. But what's vital is it's really not new to Leviticus. It stretches all the way back to the days of Abraham and Isaac, where God says, I want you to take thy son. Do you know what the Hebrew is? You know what the Hebrew really means? Your son, thine only son. It emphasizes something that God sees. He watched it for a while. He observed it. He noticed it. He can be patient. He can go for a week without calling it to your attention, or a month. But eventually, I know it's right. He says, I'm beginning to notice that the son of the promise, you're falling in love with him more than you're falling on he who gave the promise. And I get that, the son of your old age, and you caught up into the moment, but wait a minute. I can't really go too deep into this, but maybe you're spending more time with the boy than building altars. Maybe there's something lacking, something getting in the way because I'm a jealous God. I can't be second, and neither will I even be tied for first. I stand in a category all by myself. So I want you to take him and offer him as an olah, a burnt offering. You know, everything was burnt but the skin. Burnt to a crisp. Not only you got to understand, was he telling that I want the boy slit, I want him burnt. That's deep stuff. What parent can do that? But Isaac was as good as a dead man. He was gone. He told the young men, you stay here, because me and the lad are coming back here. Isn't he deep? God must come raise him from the dead. Not only from the slit, but burning. He'd never seen that before. But when you trust God, you believe all kinds of things that God can do. And he calls the place of his worship, what did he call it? Jehovah Jireh. You will discover that God can provide things when your worship is right. You will discover that God can send things and change things and open things up when your worship is right. So this is the word. But it's not only this offering, but it was the grain offerings associated with worship for thanksgiving. This affirms God as the ultimate provider and supplier. In its most foundational motivation, please hear me when I'm saying in this. Foundational motivation, true worship rises from gratitude for who God is. Not just what God does, but who God is. I have to train my mind in prayer that adoration comes before supplication. ACTS. And thanksgiving comes even before supplication. So I've got to train my mind. And I want to tell you something. I don't purport to be any bigger than you, any stronger than you. But one thing I'm learning how to taste God in is when I've got urgent needs and I know I need to get a breakthrough, that before I get to supplication, I want to spend enough time on adoration and thanksgiving. And you know what God has even told me? That when you really pray adoration, when you really pray confession, and when you really pray thanksgiving, you don't even have to speak all the supplication. Just leave it to me. I got your back. I'll cover what you can't even enunciate or get right. I already know your need. So this is the grain offering. It plays out in Leviticus chapter 2, 1 through 16, 6, 14 through 18, 7, 12 through 13. And then there's this peace offering. This is important. Associated with an established peace and fellowship and reconciliation between God and his people. It also affirms that God delivered you and saved you to be in spiritual peace with him and others. Church, that's why we got to make sure that when we come into the house of God to worship God, can I say it like they say it down south? Ain't nobody you got a problem with. You got to make sure of that now. You got to make sure ain't nobody you got a problem with. You ain't nobody you got a problem with. I feel good about him and her and him and her and him. Them, I feel good about them. And God says that this is what this peace offering is about. And then you go on to the sin offerings and the trespass offering. Let me just draw it. The atonement is now introduced. I don't think Abram and Isaac and Jacob understood this because they, in the words of Paul, were only seeing through a glass dimly. They didn't really get atonement the way we did. And I think they were not clueless, but they didn't understand the atoning blood of Jesus. Job would offer prayers for his sons. Wouldn't he do it? He would offer prayers for his sons. In case they blew it, and you know, I like the way in case they blew it, he know they did blow it. So he'd go and offer intercession for them and his daughters in case something went down at the siesta that was out of step. So he would pray for them and they would be forgiven or be atoned for. Genuine worship cannot be separated from doing right before God and with others. Let me say it again. That's what this atonement was for. And then finally, the trespass offering was associated with a merciful atonement for sin. But get this now. My sister asked me a question this week about this. But it was not intended to address sins rooted in a spirit of defiance and rebellion. It didn't cover that. You can study it yourself. Leviticus chapter 5, 14 through 6, 7, 7, 1 through 7. It called the people to see sin as God sees it. Here it is. I'm still working on that. I am. Preacher notwithstanding, teacher notwithstanding, Bible student notwithstanding, there are times that I don't take sin as serious as God. And God said, that's a problem, man. Got to fix that. You got to work on that. And this whole trespass offering was just to keep them aware. Can we say it? It's not prolific, it's not poetic, but it's real. Sin stinks. It's a stench to the nostril of God. I can't perfume sin. No. Ain't enough Lagerfeld to cover that, you know. You got to just admit it's bad. So he turns his face from it. Isn't that amazing? His hand is not. His arm is not. But your sins are separated here from sin. Let me move then just finally to the insights. That's the instruction, the insights. 4 things. The atonement, 36 references in Leviticus alone. This is where they are really being taught about the atonement. And all these would reference Christ, who would be the atonement for our sins. This is typology. The type. Now they're learning about the Christ who would come, the blood that would be scattered. It began with something on the lintels of that place in Egypt that saved them, but they didn't get it. Now they're getting clarity that there's life in the blood, there's cleansing in the blood. I plead the blood, I pray the blood, I trust in the blood. I trust in the blood more than my Bible reading. I trust in the Lord blood more than my prayer life. I trust in the blood more than my very best Tuesday, because Wednesday's coming and Wednesday can be whacked. I can get off on Wednesday. And I plead the blood 36 times in Leviticus. There's something else in here. 131 references to holiness. You ever heard the phrase that cleanliness is next to godliness? A lot of it comes out of Leviticus. Sometimes even before they come to God, they'll clean up yourself. It's amazing, clean up yourself. You dirty, get up. And you say, well, God, you ain't care about that. You say, I do care. Doesn't mean I can't pray if I'm perspiring. Well, I'm not going to swim too deep in those waters. That ain't what I'm talking about. But you've got to know that there is, if you can fix up for the dignitary, you can fix up for God. That's what he's saying. You can clean it up. So obedience is also prominent. This is an insight, and it defines the mindset of God-centered worship, my obedience to God. I can't prove this. I can't prove it. I know you all say, well, man, prove it. Well, I'm just saying, Jesus said he's going to come when they're least expecting, right? The world is never expecting, right? But I don't know my shepherd, my Renee. I somehow just believe that they're going to come when they're least. That's why I just believe. I had a brother who talk like that. I believe he talk like that. Believe that he probably gonna come back on a Sunday morning. Can you imagine me taking that day off? Can you imagine me saying now I'm gonna sleep in a little bit longer? Can you just imagine it? That's those hours and virgins. Oh, I love this. Tell the story of old Meg down in the South. You know, old Meg was in old antebellum South, and old master said, listen, we're going to shut down early. We're going to shut down early. Old Meg got to go in and get ready for the Lord coming on Sunday. And old Meg said, looked at him, old master, I'm going to tell you something, I stayed ready. I love that. I ain't got to get ready, I stays ready. When you learn how to worship God, when you learn how to keep your worship right and get it right, keep it right, what you are saying to the enemy, that our stays ready. And that's the nature of the book of Leviticus, which brings us to accountability. Worship in Leviticus is an absolute requirement to be right and stay right. That's the message this morning. We're going to move on to Numbers, and that's where it's going to go downhill for this generation. That's just a fact. This is where it goes downhill. This is when they make a decision, that God makes a decision, and their goose is cooked. And there's a lesson to be learned in Numbers, not stepping up. Not believing God, but we'll get to that one. Now it's about worship. Now, see, brother is going to come and lead us in an invitation, and this is a good time for you, me, just to say, you know what, I ain't no shame in my game. I don't mind coming down and acknowledging something that needs to be fixed, something that needs to be corrected, something that needs to be addressed, weakness, struggles, strongholds, whatever it is. I've got something, and the brother's going to pray, and we're going to give you this opportunity to leave here knowing that, hey, I'm where I need to be with God. My worship is a sweet aroma. So Todd, you come back now as we sing this invitation song, and we will give you an opportunity to respond.